Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise to speak about the supplemental that is before the Senate in terms of the appropriations. And much of this bill is about supporting the men and women in uniform of the United States who are serving this country around the world and act as sentries for America's freedom around the world. And the question is, will we put the resources necessary to match the challenge we have given them and the call to service we have asked of them? And that's what this appropriation supplemental bill is largely all about. In that context, there is one particular area of funding that doesn't go to where we have troops, but where we in fact care about what's happening in that part of the world, and that is Pakistan. We care about it because it is along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border that, in fact, Osama bin Laden likely exists, that al-Qaeda is operating in, crossing back and forth in that border in order to attack our troops in Afghanistan, and also because of the Taliban. And so we have clear national security interests as it relates to that part of the world. We all agree that the situation in Pakistan is at the top of the list of probably our most serious national security challenges, because this is where al-Qaeda has reconstituted itself. And this was the entity, along with bin Laden, that struck us on September 11th on that fateful day. Late last month, the Secretary of State warned us that Pakistan's government is facing, quote, an existential threat from Islamist militants who establish operations dangerously close to the capital city of Islamabad. These are militants who wish to do us harm, plot new terrorist attacks, or, God forbid, seize control of that country's nuclear arsenal. There are plenty of reasons for the United States to be engaged, and since 2001, Pakistan has received more than $12 billion in assistance from the United States government. The idea behind the assistance has been to support democratic institutions, human rights, economic development, along with counterterrorism operations to fight the Taliban and al-Qaeda and create the conditions for stability in the country. Unfortunately, under the lax oversight of the Bush administration, that assistance had very few strings attached to it. And under that administration, it's hard to see what kind of results we actually achieve for the money that we spent. Democracy and institutions of civil society are as fragile as ever. The Taliban is expanding its reach, and we've heard reports from about the Pakistani government expanding its nuclear arsenal. So $12 billion later, the way we send assistance may or may not have worked for Pakistan, but it certainly didn't work for us. So, Madam President, we have to constantly ask ourselves, how are we using our money in pursuit of our national interests and our national security interests, and what type of benchmarks and progress are we making so that we can, in fact, all here respond both as fiduciaries to the taxpayers of the country and at the same time in measuring benchmarks towards our national security goals. It's our responsibility to see that there's transparency and accountability in whatever assistance we're providing. And as the administration makes the case to reverse what it acknowledges are, quote, rapidly deteriorating security and economic conditions there, we have to make sure the funding we're sending over is actually doing its part to make the situation better. We have to ask those questions about the Pakistan funding in this current supplemental bill as well. For starters, in this supplemental, I think, we look at it and it's pretty significant. There's over $1.6 billion in the supplemental for Pakistan, including $400 million for the Pakistan Counterinsurgency Capability Fund, $439 million in economic support funds, and $700 million in coalition support funds. Now, I'm concerned about this funding, but I want to specifically talk about the $700 million in coalition support funds. Those funds are used to reimburse the Pakistani government for the logistical and military expenses of fighting Islamist militants. as the Pakistani military increases these activities, and we've seen those military activities finally take place in a way that we think is moving in the right direction, those coalition support funds are expected to increase substantially as well. So if we're going to have a shot at the militants, we're going to need to provide support. And we are agreed on that, I think. But that doesn't mean that we should be sending out blank checks. Along with my distinguished colleague from Iowa, Senator Harkin, and several colleagues in the House, we requested the Government Accountability Office to look into the assistance we provided to Pakistan, including the $6.9 billion in coalition support funds that it received. And in a June 2008 report, the GAO found that the Pentagon didn't consistently verify Pakistani claims for reimbursement, and additional oversight controls were needed. Here's an example from that report. The United States was reimbursing the Pakistani government $19,000 per month for each of about 20 passenger vehicles, about $9 million in total, even though we later found out that we were paying for the same 20 vehicles over and over. A February 2009 report that we also asked for echoed and confirmed those findings. It said that the Pentagon needed to improve oversight of coalition support funds reimbursements. Earlier today at a foreign relations hearing, I asked Admiral Mullen, and he acknowledged that we haven't had good controls in the past on the coalition support funds, but he assured the committee that the controls have improved and additional steps are being taken to make sure the funds are used wisely. The Deputy Secretary of Defense outlined these steps in a letter to Chairman Kerry last month, including new guidelines, additional face-to-face meetings with Pakistani counterparts, and additional visits by the Department of Defense to Pakistan to evaluate and refine the coalition support fund claim processing and validation procedures. And personally, I've met with Ambassador Holbrooke, our special envoy to this region, as well as questioned Secretary Clinton yesterday before the Foreign Relations Committee, and they both assured me that this administration is developing metrics to measure success, to change the way we engage in Pakistan so that we can defeat the militants and bring stability to the country and to the region. And I'm pleased to see these steps being taken, and I look forward to closely monitoring them as we move forward. So let me conclude, Madam President, by saying we all realize that conditions on the ground make detailed reporting and accountability a major challenge. And we can't expect to be getting daily comprehensive spreadsheets emailed from every remote mountain region. But as best as we can, it is the responsibility of this Congress to ensure that all of our funds are being used in a manner that advances our national interests and our national security interests. So with these changes that have taken place, I think, partly because we've asked for these reports, partly because of the questioning at these hearings, partly because of the new leadership of the administration, I plan to vote for the supplemental. In doing so, however, I want to send a very clear message that it is not and should not be construed as a blank check. I have concerns with the Coalition Support Fund program and concern about Pakistan's nuclear program. Money is fungible, and I'm really concerned as we send money to Pakistan for one purpose, that frees up their money to be buying nuclear weapons, something that is not in our interest or that part of the world's interest. I'm glad the Obama administration has taken steps to improve accountability, and in the future we need to do even more. We need to be sure that we don't wind up right back here a year from now having to say the same things. We can't afford to yet again take one step forward and two steps back. And above all, we can't afford to be sending such resources without achieving the national goals of security and interests that we have. That's the best way to make sure we don't lose sight of our goal here, and that's also the best way that we keep Americans safe. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor and observe the absence of a quorum.